Second reading is from 1 Peter chapter 5. So bow down under God's strong hand. Then when the time comes, God will lift you up. Since God cares for you, let him carry all your burdens and worries. Be disciplined and stay on guard. Your enemy, the slandering one, is prowling around outside like a roaring lion, just waiting to devour. Resist and be strong in your faith, knowing that your brothers and sisters throughout the world are fellow sufferers with you. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of grace, through Jesus the Anointed, has called you, will restore you, support you, strengthen you, and ground you. For all power belongs to God, now and forever. Amen. So Memorial Day is tomorrow, and you will remember those who sacrificed their lives in service to our country and to a cause greater than themselves, as well as to protect their brothers and sisters in arms. It is a day when we remember the fallen, those who died in wars and conflicts, from the Revolutionary War some 250 years ago to our current war in Afghanistan. Yes, that war still goes on. As Ward Johnson reminded me a couple times, Memorial Day is for soldiers who died in battle. Veterans Day is for all those who served either in wartime or peacetime, both in the present as well as in the past. However, I would dare say that for those who served in military battle, a little piece of them died there on the battlefield. Some survive, others do not, and those in battle experience this firsthand. How could this not be so? And for any soldier in battle, there is always that first clash with the gunfire, the smoke, the screams, the chaos, the fear. That first battle takes away the innocence that came before it. Innocence dies in war. So yes, Memorial Day is for the sacred purpose of remembering those who died in battle on behalf of our country, but let us never forget that for all those who've seen combat, a little of themselves died. The innocence of youth, the comfort of peace, and most sadly, the lives of brothers and sisters they fought alongside. For combat veterans, Memorial Day is especially difficult. They share the grief of the families who've lost so much because of humanity's failure to find peace void of war. So keep combat veterans, along with Gold Star families, especially close in your thoughts and prayers today and tomorrow and always. This I learned from the person I remember this morning, my childhood minister, Morgan Jones. Some 30 years before he helped found the church my family attended, Morgan was a soldier in the great conflict known as World War II. In fact, he was part of that pivotal Normandy invasion that turned the tide of the war and led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. I recall one morning traveling with my father and Morgan to a Bible study. Morgan was a pretty studied guy and loved to teach the Bible and biblical theology. He would travel all around Columbia, Greene, and Dutchess counties in upstate New York, holding Bible studies in people's homes throughout the week. He put a lot of miles on his vehicles, and he was proud of that. Well, my dad loved to attend these Bible studies, and so did I, and we did so as often as we could. When I was in high school, maybe my sophomore year, my father and I would meet Morgan at the Great American Shopping Plaza in Carroll, New York, at the foothills of the Catskills, where the Great American Grocery Store stood, which was my first place of employment. Morgan would pick us up in his beloved red Toyota Tercel and drive up Windham Mountain to a Bible study at the Hitchcocks, just outside of Windham. On Memorial Day, maybe 1987, my father and I met Morgan as usual. Bible study for Morgan should never take a day off. So even on that holiday, we had Bible study. My father, a veteran himself, in a good mood that day, a day off for him, greeted Morgan with a happy Memorial Day. Morgan was noticeably somber, and as we got in the car and settled in, he quipped, "Happy Memorial Day? Nothing happy about it." My father liked history and was always curious about people and their stories. He inquired gently about Morgan's service during World War II. I'm not sure if it was that drive, that Memorial Day, or another Bible study day. I was curious too about Morgan's service. We knew from his messages on Sunday morning that he was there at Normandy on D-Day. But my father wanted to know a little more detail about his experience. But Morgan shut the questions down pretty curtly. He didn't want to talk about it. The silence after Morgan rather strongly shutting verbal recollections down, it said, "Enough. War is hell," that silence cried. What we did come to know about Morgan's experience as a soldier, we learned from what he shared from the pulpit. His service during World War II was pivotal to the direction of his life. Part of his duties was as the military chaplain's escort. And he talked about how he wasn't very religious at this point, but the chaplain made an impression on him. He grew up in the tough environs of the Bronx in New York City, and he told stories about growing up on the tough streets of the city. He was a bit of a rascal, he admitted, and was not immune to getting into trouble. He was not so studious either. He grew up in a working poor family. His father was tough on him and drank too much. From an early age, he was pushed to work and make the family some money. So from an early age, he was a message courier in the city. He delivered packages on his bike or messages on his bike from office to office throughout Manhattan, a common job for kids in the city at the time. He grew up fast, saw a lot, and much of it not good or highlighting the good. Still, Morgan came to really respect the chaplain. His spirituality was first tilled by this chaplain he drove around with, spent time with. He also experienced the chaplain leading worship services, and amid the fear of war, Morgan felt comforted. Morgan's relationship with the chaplain was the first movement toward his journey to becoming a pastor. The evangelical tradition calls this planting the seed of salvation. What Morgan also once shared from the pulpit was that amid the utter fear and chaos of storming the beaches of Normandy, he made a fateful decision. Influenced by the chaplain's faith and faithfulness, surrounded by the horrors of war, and in that hellish moment seeing comrades die around him, Morgan made the promise that if he survived this horror, if he made it out alive, he'd commit his life to serving God like the chaplain in memory of his fallen comrades. He survived, and he kept his promise. I'm sure Morgan's meeting his wife there in France after the invasion of Normandy helped too. Mary Jane, who was truly one of the saintliest persons I've ever met, was an army nurse who arrived in France and tended to the wounded after D-Day. We honor her this morning as well. And that is where she met Morgan, in France. Following the war through the GI Bill, Morgan went off to Bible college. He attended Columbia Bible College in Columbia, South Carolina, and I wondered why a New York guy, went down to South Carolina. But his new wife, Mary Jane, was attending that college before she entered the Army Nurse Corps. So he joined her in college there in Columbia, South Carolina. And after college, he became a missionary. By that time, he was married and had a couple kids, but he chose to take the gospel to the remote indigenous tribes of South America. Morgan often told stories about translating the Bible into a language that was not yet a written language. It required him to transpose the spoken language first and then eventually translate a portion of the New Testament, the Gospel of John, into that newly transposed language. Yes, he was a brilliant guy. He eventually returned home. His family would grow to be a family of 8, himself, his wife, and 6 boys. I guess Mary Jane and himself stopped at 6, stopped trying for a daughter in the bunch, but I'm not sure. He was ordained as a Presbyterian minister, but eventually founded a Baptist-style Bible church in upstate New York, Claremont Bible Church, and that is where my family met him when I was merely a baby. He was my first mentor. Not only that, his influence was so great on our family that even after he left Claremont, his influence remained via recordings of his sermons. We still have them, my family does. My brothers Bill and Brett were deeply influenced by those sermons that they heard through those tapes, so much so that they too became preachers. My youngest brother Brett, the one whom I shared about a couple weeks ago graduating from college, well, he attended Morgan and Mary Jane's alma mater, now called Columbia International University. All that said, I know if Morgan was around today, he'd probably be a bit disappointed in me, though he'd enjoy having a good theological discussion, trying to change my mind. I left the fold and faith he so powerfully was a part of and helped lead. I could not accept the answer he once gave to a question I remember offered up at Bible study. What about those who've never heard the gospel or even never heard the name Jesus Christ? How could they end up in hell for something they could not help? My eventual universalist faith gave me the answer. God, as loving Father, will reconcile all back to himself. My faith in that answer would sadden him, though it gives me immense joy. But I've learned this in my 46 years. Part of growing up is learning to accept the fact that you can never make everyone happy, even those closest to you. Sometimes being true to yourself and your faith means disappointing those who love you and whom you love. Nonetheless, something always remains in those important relationships. For me, in my memory of Morgan, what remains is my deep sense of gratitude for his life, his ministry, his influence on my life. So on this Sunday before Memorial Day, I remember Morgan, the war veteran who stormed the beaches of Normandy and left a little of himself there, and who experienced the sad silence of loss from then on. I remember Morgan, the military chaplain, mentored pastor of Claremont Bible Church, who dedicated his life to ministry and to the good news of Jesus. I remember my first mentor and a good man who still looms large in the memory of the Erickson family, and in this Christian universalist who still considers him a central part of my own journey to ministry. Amen.
Amen.